Late 1941. The war on the Eastern Front was a brutal, grinding meat grinder. Soviet forces, reeling from the initial German onslaught, desperately needed supplies: tanks, aircraft, ammunition, and vital raw materials. Across the globe, the Allied command in London knew that without a constant flow of aid, the Soviet resistance might collapse, leaving the entire continent vulnerable. The only viable route? The treacherous, ice-choked waters of the Arctic Ocean, through the Barents Sea, to the Russian ports of Murmansk and Arkhangelsk. The Arctic Convoys became the lifeline, a perilous artery stretching from Britain and Iceland to the Soviet Union. But the journey was a gauntlet of unimaginable dangers. German U-boats, long-range bombers, and surface raiders like the Tirpitz lurked in the icy fjords of Norway, waiting to ambush the slow-moving merchant ships. Each convoy was a floating target, and losses mounted dramatically. Traditional escort destroyers and frigates fought valiantly, but their sonar ranges were limited in the turbulent Arctic waters, and the vastness of the ocean made searching for hidden U-boats a deadly game of chance. The weather itself was an enemy. Blizzards, freezing fog, and polar nights offered perfect cover for wolf packs. By early 1942, British Admiralty intelligence reports painted a grim picture. German U-boat commanders were exploiting gaps in convoy defenses, areas where surface escorts couldn't effectively cover, especially near the ice edge or in shallow, complex waters. Conventional anti-submarine warfare (ASW) tactics were struggling. In desperation, a radical idea emerged from the depths of naval strategy. If large destroyers couldn't cover every threat, perhaps smaller, specialized submarines could. The concept seemed insane. Deploying miniature submarines, barely larger than a bus, into the most hostile ocean on Earth. These weren't the long-range hunters of the Atlantic. They were designed for coastal defense or special operations. The physics alone were daunting. Extreme cold, ice formation, shallow water navigation, and the constant threat of depth charges. Admiral Sir Max Horton, Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches, listened in silence during a classified briefing. Then, he simply said, "Gentlemen, we need eyes beneath the ice. Find a way to put them there." And with those words, the impossible became a top-secret naval objective. Somewhere in a secluded naval base in Scotland, a small team of naval architects, submariners, and intelligence officers began sketching what would soon be known as Operation Guidance, the deployment of Midget submarines to protect the Arctic convoys. It would be one of the most audacious and covert naval projects of the entire war, fought not with torpedoes, but with stealth, sensors, and nerves of steel. Spring 1942. Deep within a hidden dockyard near Rosyth, Scotland, a small team of British naval engineers and submariners gathered around tables scattered with blueprints and specialized navigation charts. The project had no official name yet, only a code: Guidance, short for providing guidance and protection to the vulnerable convoys. At first, even seasoned submariners doubted the idea. Submarines existed, yes, but these were to be the tiny X-craft, Midget submarines primarily designed for attacking enemy warships in harbor or for reconnaissance in shallow waters. Sending them into the open, deep, and ferociously cold Arctic Ocean, often alongside large convoys, was something else entirely. One crack in the hull, one malfunction in the delicate ice avoidance systems, and the entire crew would be lost. The man chosen to turn this wild concept into reality was Captain S.M. Rawlinson, a veteran submariner known for his unconventional thinking. He quickly realized they would need submarines both robust and precise, ones that could survive crushing pressures, navigate under ice, and detect enemy U-boats with unparalleled stealth. Rawlinson brought in experts from Vickers Armstrongs, the original designers of the X-craft, to modify the existing designs. For months, they ran experiments in Scottish locks, testing modified propulsion systems, new sonar arrays, and specialized heating units for the crew. The main challenge was to adapt these small vessels for sustained, long-range patrols in an environment they were never designed for. Two main operational roles emerged from the chaos. Ice edge patrols. X-craft would patrol the edges of the permanent ice pack, a favorite hunting ground for German U-boats seeking cover. Their small size made them less detectable than conventional submarines. Convoy close escort. In specific high-risk zones, X-craft would shadow merchant ships, using their passive sonar to detect U-boats before they could launch attack. Their stealth allowed them to operate closer to the convoy without alerting the enemy. Each role had its advantages and terrifying risks. Ice edge patrols risked being trapped by shifting ice. Close escort required navigating through dense formations of ships in rough seas, often near surface escorts that might mistake them for enemy vessels. To test them, engineers deployed early prototypes into the frigid waters off the Shetland Islands, a mere fraction of the Arctic's challenge, but enough to reveal endless problems. Batteries drained rapidly in the cold. Periscopes froze. Navigation under dynamic ice flows proved almost impossible. Yet the failures only hardened their resolve. In a secret report to the First Sea Lord, Rawlinson wrote, "The only way to provide critical early warning and defensive coverage in the Arctic is through a stealth presence. Success will depend on specialized modifications, elite crews, and absolute secrecy." Churchill personally approved the plan in August 1942. The project's scope expanded overnight. More X-craft were secretly diverted from other duties, specialized equipment was requisitioned, and elite submariners were hand-picked and sworn to silence. The silent service, once focused on covert attacks, became part of a daring defensive experiment. Every crewman knew only fragments of the plan, enough to do their job, but never enough to guess its full strategic importance. Somewhere in a secure naval facility, a small brass plate was affixed to the first modified X-craft. It read, X-23 Operation Guidance. Arctic Deployment. Top Secret. The countdown to one of the greatest undersea gambles in wartime history had begun. Autumn 1942. The hidden dockyards of Scotland hummed with an unusual intensity. Sparks flew, specialized tools clanked, and beneath the noise, a secret project was taking shape. A project so ambitious that even those working on it often shook their heads in disbelief. The goal: to transform small, coastal reconnaissance submarines into deep cold, long-endurance Arctic hunters, capable of operating in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The problem: no one had ever attempted anything remotely like it. At the heart of Operation Guidance were the tiny but resilient X-craft. These midget submarines, roughly 50 feet long, were already marvels of compact engineering. But the Arctic demanded radical changes. Firstly, thermal insulation was paramount. The already cramped interiors were lined with new cork and asbestos panels to combat the brutal cold. A complex system of heated water pipes, using waste engine heat, was routed through the compartments to prevent critical equipment from freezing and to provide a meager warmth for the 3- or 4-man crew. Secondly, navigation under ice was a nightmare. Traditional periscopes were useless under solid ice. Engineers developed a specialized, retractable ice keel sonar array capable of mapping the underside of ice floes and detecting open leads or thinner ice for surfacing. New magnetic compasses were also installed, more reliable than gyroscopic ones in the extreme latitude. Thirdly, endurance and stealth were enhanced. The X-craft's diesel engines, used for surface running and battery charging, were modified for extreme cold starts. Batteries themselves were upgraded for greater capacity, crucial for long submerged patrols. Passive sonar systems, already excellent, were finely tuned to filter out ice noise and listen for the distinct signatures of German U-boats, far beyond the range of traditional ASW vessels. In a converted workshop at HMS Forth, naval engineers and submarine specialists worked side by side, often through the long Scottish night. Every inch of space had to count, one engineer later admitted. Failure to keep the cold out, or to find a way under the ice, meant freezing solid or being crushed. Specialized towing gear was also developed. The X-craft were too small to make the entire journey to the Arctic unassisted. They would be towed by larger conventional submarines or surface vessels for much of the journey, requiring robust, quick-release towing mechanisms that could function in extreme weather. When the first modified X-craft, the X-23, completed its deep cold sea trials in a remote Norwegian fjord, simulated conditions, everyone held their breath. The sonar successfully mapped ice, the heating system functioned, and its passive acoustic sensors picked up distant simulated U-boat signatures. Fuel surged through, smooth, uninterrupted, perfect. Cheers erupted across the command center. It worked. But this was only the beginning. They had solved the engineering puzzle, now they had to do it for real, across one of the most heavily monitored and dangerous waterways on Earth, without the enemy ever finding out. In a war filled with U-boats, surface raiders, and reconnaissance aircraft, secrecy was everything. Every order was coded. Every X-craft was labeled as Special Patrol Vessel. Even Admiral Horton himself referred to them in his notes with deliberate vagueness. Operation guidance had moved from theory to reality. The Allies had built a silent guardian for the Arctic convoys. Now they had to deploy it under Hitler's nose. Winter 1942, spring 1943. The cold waters off northern Scotland were now the proving grounds for the most unforgiving naval experiment of the war. What worked on the drafting table often failed disastrously when faced with genuine Arctic conditions. The X-craft crews learned faster than most. The ocean's hostility amplified every mechanical and human failure. The first full-scale trials involved simulating the tow phase, the arduous journey where the Midget submarine was pulled by a larger vessel. During one severe North Sea gale, the tow cable of the experimental craft, the X-24, snapped. The tiny submarine, with its crew of 4 trapped inside, was tossed violently in the heavy swell. It took 6 terrifying hours for the towing submarine to reconnect the line. That failure became a lesson in metallurgy, leading to the development of reinforced, quick-release tow mechanisms designed to be operated from within the X-craft itself. Ice navigation was the ultimate test. Early attempts to maneuver under solid ice floes resulted in the magnetic compasses becoming wildly erratic, a known phenomenon at high latitude. Furthermore, the passive sonar, though excellent for detecting U-boats, was often overwhelmed by the constant cracking and groaning of the moving ice pack, creating a sensory overload that drove crews to the brink of exhaustion. Engineers responded by redesigning the sonar systems with frequency filters specifically tuned to isolate the acoustic signature of German diesels from the ambient ice noise. They also implemented a unique, simple solution for high-latitude navigation: dead reckoning relying purely on time, speed, and heading, executed by highly disciplined crews who meticulously recorded every movement. Simulated patrols near the ice edge revealed another danger: the human element. Operating in the cold, cramped, damp interior for days on end, facing the constant risk of being trapped or crushed, led to severe psychological strain. Submariners, hand-picked for their resilience, established strict 4-hour rotating shifts for navigation, listening watches, and rest. When an X-craft finally ran a 72-hour deep cold trial without a critical system failure, the small team celebrated quietly, knowing they had achieved a technical victory against nature itself. General naval planners, reviewing the test reports, started referring to operation guidance not as a gamble, but as a viable, specialized tactic. The engineers and submariners who had once been dismissed as dreamers were now essential. Their precise modifications, their cold water dives, and their nerves had turned an impossible idea into cold, hard naval engineering. Late 1943. The time for theory and testing was over. The urgency of the Arctic convoys, particularly after the near disaster of convoy PQ-17, demanded immediate deployment. The specially modified X-craft were loaded onto their parent submarines and larger transports, moving under the constant cloak of absolute secrecy. The logistics of getting these Midget submarines to the Arctic theater, often a 2-week journey, were staggering. Each X-craft had to be transported to the designated deployment zone, usually just south of the Barents Sea, and then attached to its towing submarine. The transfer operation, carried out in remote anchorages or far out at sea in rough conditions, was a delicate high-wire act. Crews had to emerge onto the deck of the tiny X-craft, often awash in freezing spray, to secure the tow line and check the pressure hull before submerging for the long, silent tow. The parent submarines served as the command centers and mobile support bases. They carried extra fuel, spare parts, and rotation crews for the X-craft. Communication between the parent and the towed Midget was minimal, limited to hydrophone tapping codes to maintain radio silence. The deployment itself was a navigational nightmare. The tow required maintaining precise depth to avoid surface detection while dealing with strong, unpredictable currents. Crews inside the X-craft were isolated for days, relying solely on the structural integrity of their small vessel and the skill of the towing crew. As the convoys approached the most dangerous zones off the coast of German-occupied Norway, the X-craft were released. Their operational phase began: silent patrol. They took up their designated stations along the convoy flanks or near the treacherous ice edge, becoming the invisible eyes and ears of the Allied lifeline. The Germans, preoccupied with traditional destroyer escorts, had no idea a silent, specialized threat now patrolled beneath the waves. The operational success of the X-craft in operation guidance lay not in sinking enemy vessels, but in detection and deterrence. Their primary weapon was stealth. Their small size meant they generated significantly less acoustic noise than any conventional submarine or escort vessel, allowing them to remain virtually undetectable by German U-boat. Lying silently on the seabed or slowly patrolling at periscope depth near the ice line, the X-craft acted as forward acoustic sensors. The specialized, highly sensitive passive sonar arrays proved their worth instantly. In the deep, cold, and often clear Arctic waters, they could detect the distinct sound of a distant German U-boat's diesel engines or electric motors long before the convoy's surface escorts could. This early warning system was invaluable. When an X-craft detected an incoming U-boat, the procedure was immediate and precise. A coded, directional signal was transmitted via a low-frequency, short-burst radio to the nearest surface escort commander. This whisper in the dark provided the exact bearing and range, transforming the surface escort's blind search into a targeted attack run. The mere presence of the X-craft had a profound deterrent effect. On several occasions, German U-boat commanders, having been accurately targeted and forced to dive by a sudden, precise depth charge attack, reported to base that the Allied ASW coverage in the Arctic had become unnaturally accurate. They didn't know the source of the intelligence, but the increased risk forced them to keep their distance, thereby widening the gap between them and the vulnerable merchant ships. The X-craft were the silent guardians, defending the convoys not with firepower, but with the cold, hard logic of acoustic superiority. Despite the successful deployment, the Arctic theater was a relentless enemy. The X-craft crews faced extreme and unique challenges every hour. The most persistent threat was the ice itself. Unexpectedly large and solid ice floes could descend upon a submerged X-craft, trapping it against the seabed or the surface. Crews had to execute terrifying maneuvers, using the specialized ice keel sonar to find thin patches or open leads, for a crucial ascent to recharge batteries. One X-craft, the X-25, spent 48 nerve-wracking hours trapped beneath a massive sheet of ice before its crew managed to blast through a weak spot using emergency compressed air charges. Mechanical failure due to cold was common. Critical components, despite insulation, would freeze. Depth gauges became sluggish, rudder linkages stiffened, and periscope hydraulics failed. Maintenance was performed in the cramped, freezing interior, often by torchlight, with crewmen fighting exhaustion and hypothermia. Human endurance was pushed to the absolute limit. The combination of intense cold, high humidity from breathing, constant noise from the hull under pressure, and the isolation created an environment of psychological distress. The success of these patrols hinged entirely on the discipline of the small, hand-picked crews, who maintained rigorous log-keeping and watch schedules under conditions few other submariners ever faced. Yet, each crew completed their assigned patrol, returning to the parent vessel battered but unbroken. Their resilience and ability to solve complex technical problems under extreme pressure ensured that the vital supplies continued to flow through the Arctic lifeline. The X-craft played a direct, though secondary, role in the overall strategy to neutralize the German surface threat in the Arctic. The presence of the massive battleship Tirpitz, Hitler's fleet in being, continually drew massive Allied resources to the Arctic to protect the convoys. While the primary mission of Operation Guidance was convoy escort, the X-craft's ability to operate in shallow, heavily defended Norwegian fjords, where the Tirpitz often hid, made them invaluable for reconnaissance. X-craft were occasionally tasked with highly dangerous, covert missions to patrol the approaches to the Tirpitz's anchorages. They provided confirmation of the battleship's location and defensive posture, information that was critical for planning the subsequent major aerial and conventional submarine attacks against the ship. Their small size and advanced stealth allowed them to achieve intelligence gathering that large, conventional submarines simply could not. Thus, the secret submarines served a dual strategic purpose: protecting the convoys at sea and gathering the necessary intelligence to neutralize the very surface threat that made the convoys so vulnerable. Operation Guidance was a masterclass in strategic deception, using small vessels to achieve disproportionately large intelligence and tactical gains. The successful, though secret, operations of the X-craft in the Arctic left a lasting legacy on naval architecture and submarine warfare. The lessons learned about cold weather endurance, under-ice navigation, and stealth acoustics were instrumental in the development of post-war submarine technology. The X-craft's unique retractable sonar array and insulation techniques were later applied to larger, nuclear-powered attack submarines, designed for extended operations under the permanent Arctic ice cap. The project proved that small, highly specialized submersibles could achieve strategic effects previously reserved for much larger warships. It highlighted the power of acoustic stealth over sheer size. The discipline, training protocols, and deep-cold survival techniques developed by the X-craft crews became the benchmark for elite submarine forces globally. Veterans of Operation Guidance later contributed to civilian and military projects, applying their deep knowledge of deep-cold hydrodynamics and compact engineering. Operation Guidance, the secret deployment of Midget submarines to the Arctic convoys, was a silent, invisible victory in the longest and coldest battle of the war. These X-craft, operating on the very edge of technological and human endurance, provided the vital early warning system that saved countless Allied merchant ships and thousands of tons of critical cargo. They disrupted German U-boat tactics, forcing them to hunt cautiously and less effectively. Their story is a testament to the fact that victory in modern warfare often relies as much on covert ingenuity and small-scale specialization as it does on massive fleets and armies. The X-craft were the unseen guardians of the Arctic lifeline, ensuring that the necessary supplies reached the Soviet front, keeping the Eastern Front alive, and cementing the strategic momentum that would eventually lead to Allied victory. The true legacy of the secret submarines of the Arctic convoys lies in the lives they saved and the crucial role they played in sustaining the global effort against the Axis powers, a heroic chapter of naval warfare fought in the frozen shadows.